My friends, I stand before you today with a message that has weighed heavily on my heart. The title may sound startling. What God showed me about Charlie Kirk will shock you. But I do not come with words of gossip, slander, or spectacle. I come as a servant who has wrestled in prayer, asking God to take away my fear, my doubts, even my hesitation, and replace them with courage to speak what is true. My friend, before I could even think about standing here and speaking about what God showed me, I had to face something that many of you face every single day, my own heart. There are moments when the weight of fear presses down so heavily that you feel as though your voice has no worth, no power, no meaning. There are times when you want to hide because the enemy whispers into your ear, "You are not enough. You will not be understood. You will fail before you even begin." I know that feeling all too well. It is like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into a valley of self-doubt and negativity. You can hear your own heartbeat pounding with anxiety. You question every word before it even leaves your lips. And in that moment, you are not fighting against people. You are fighting against yourself. The battlefield is not the world outside. It is your mind, your emotions, your soul. But the first step, the first key, the very foundation before anything else is surrender. Not surrender to defeat, but surrender to God. You see, the negative feelings will not disappear simply because we tell ourselves to be strong. Strength is not enough when the weight of discouragement presses down. Positive thinking is not enough when your mind is clouded with fear. Only God can take that burden and transform it. Only God can take the poison of negativity and replace it with the fire of His Spirit. I remember bowing my head, feeling like I had nothing to offer, and in that quiet place, a prayer came out of me that was more of a sigh than a speech. "Lord, I can't do this without you. I don't want to walk into this moment carrying bitterness, fear, or doubt. If I speak with my own strength, I will stumble. If I speak with my own pride, I will fail. So take it. Take the fear, take the weight, take the trembling of my spirit, and make it yours." And something happened in that surrender. The heaviness did not vanish in an instant, but I felt it shift. The chains were loosened. My heart, which was restless, started to beat with a different rhythm. A peace began to rise where panic had lived. That is the miracle of surrender. You do not walk away empty, you walk away filled with something greater than yourself. When you surrender those negative feelings, anger, fear, envy, bitterness, you are making room for God's presence. You are saying, "Lord, I cannot carry this anymore. I am giving you my brokenness because I want your wholeness. I am giving you my silence because I want your voice. I am giving you my weakness because I want your strength." And let me tell you, that exchange changes everything. It takes you from being bound by your emotions to being led by the Spirit. Suddenly, the very thing that was trying to crush you becomes the thing that God uses to remind you of your dependence on Him. I believe with all my heart that many of us live in a constant storm of negativity, not because God has left us, but because we have not yet surrendered those storms to Him. We clutch our fear like a shield, thinking it will protect us, when in reality it is the very thing weighing us down. We hold onto our anger, believing it makes us strong, when in truth it only makes us brittle and ready to break. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is power. When you lift your hands to God and say, "Not my will but yours be done," you are not giving up. You are stepping into the strength of heaven itself. You are no longer standing on your own limited ground. You are standing on the rock that cannot be moved. Think of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He was overwhelmed with sorrow, even unto death. He felt the weight of the cross pressing into his soul, before he ever carried it on his shoulders. He prayed, "Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me." That was the honest cry of a heart burdened with what was to come. But then came the surrender, "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." And in that surrender, the greatest victory in history was set into motion. If the Son of God Himself showed us that surrender is the path to strength, how much more do we need to follow in His steps? I know that some of you listening are carrying burdens so heavy you can barely lift your head. You wake up each morning with a heart already exhausted from the battles of yesterday. You lie down at night with a mind that will not stop replaying the voices of criticism, fear, or failure. And maybe you have tried to push through it on your own. Maybe you have tried to drown it out with distractions, or silence it with business, or even numb it with habits that only leave you emptier. But there is only one answer: surrender. Lay it down before the one who can take it. Lay it down at the feet of the one who already carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Lay it down in prayer, in honesty, even in tears, and say, "Lord, this is too much for me, but it is not too much for you." And when you do, you will discover something miraculous. You will find that your weakness becomes the very stage upon which God displays His strength. Your surrender becomes the soil where peace begins to grow. The bitterness that once poisoned your spirit begins to dissolve. The fear that once chained you begins to break. That is why I tell you, my friend, do not despise surrender. Do not fear it. It is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a new one. When you let go of what is crushing you, you make room for what will raise you. When you give God your emptiness, He fills it with His fullness. So as I prepare to share what God revealed, I first had to walk through this valley. I had to surrender the negativity inside me before I could open my mouth. And I believe that this is not just my journey. It is yours as well. Before you can step into the fullness of what God wants to show you, you must let go of what is holding you back. Today, right here, in this moment, I want you to know you don't have to carry that weight anymore. You don't have to walk in circles around your doubts. You don't have to let bitterness steal another day of joy from your life. Surrender it, hand it over, release it into the hands of the one who never fails. Because the truth is this: when you surrender, you don't lose, you finally win. You don't shrink, you rise. You don't fall apart. You are held together by a God who sees you, loves you, and will never let you go. And it all begins with one choice: to surrender. When I think about the second key, focus on God's revelation, not man's opinion, my heart feels the weight of how easy it is to drift into the noise of voices around us. We live in a world saturated with opinions. Everyone has something to say, everyone has a platform, and everyone seems so quick to judge. Sometimes those opinions are about you. Sometimes they're about the people you look up to, and other times they're about the very truth you believe. It is in that constant storm of human voices that fear and doubt grow. And if we are not careful, we begin to value the voice of man more than the voice of God. I know what it feels like to be crushed by opinion. One harsh word can linger for weeks. One misunderstanding can paralyze your confidence. And it doesn't matter if 1,000 people cheer for you. It only takes one voice of criticism to make you forget all the rest. That is the power of man's opinion when we give it authority it does not deserve. The problem is, we spend so much of our lives trying to measure up to people's expectations, and in the process, we lose sight of what God has actually revealed. But let me say this with all the passion in me: God's revelation is always greater than man's opinion. What He shows you in the quiet place of prayer, what He speaks into your heart through His Word, what He confirms in the stillness of His presence. That carries more weight, more power, more truth than every headline, every rumor, every critic combined. There came a point in my own walk where I had to choose. Was I going to live under the weight of people's judgments, or was I going to live under the light of God's revelation? And the truth is, I cannot have both. If I make man's approval my goal, I will bend and break under the shifting winds of opinion. But if I anchor my soul to God's revelation, I will stand firm even when the world shakes. You see, when God reveals something to you, it is not always easy to accept. Sometimes it shocks you, sometimes it unsettles you, sometimes it forces you to look at yourself differently. But it is always for your good. Man's opinion will tear you down to destroy you. God's revelation may tear you open, but it is always to heal, to rebuild, to transform. I remember asking myself, what if people laugh at what I say? What if they twist my words? What if they misunderstand me completely? Those were real fears, not imaginary ones. And God spoke into that fear. Why are you so concerned about their voices when you have mine? Why do you tremble at their words when you have my word? That stopped me. Because it showed me something ugly. I had given man's opinion more authority in my life than God's truth. I was measuring my worth by people's acceptance instead of God's revelation. And that is a dangerous way to live, because man's opinion will always shift. One day you are praised, the next you are rejected. One moment you are lifted up, the next you are torn down. But God's revelation remains. It does not bend, it does not waver, it does not change with the tides of public opinion. Think about Noah. The entire world had an opinion about him. They mocked him, laughed at him, ridiculed his obedience to build an ark when there wasn't a drop of rain. But Noah wasn't building according to man's opinion. He was building according to God's revelation. And when the flood came, man's opinion drowned, but God's revelation saved. Think about Moses. The people complained, criticized, doubted him at every turn. They said he brought them into the wilderness to die. They said he wasn't fit to lead. If Moses had lived by man's opinion, he would have turned back to Egypt. But he pressed on because he had seen the revelation of God's presence in the burning bush. He had heard God's voice on the mountain. He had witnessed God's power at the Red Sea, and that revelation outweighed every complaint. Think about Jesus himself. The opinions of man were scattered and fickle. Some said he was a prophet, some said he was a liar, some said he was possessed. On Palm Sunday, the crowds cried out, "Hosanna," but by Friday those same voices cried, "Crucify him." If Jesus had built his mission on public opinion, there would have been no cross, no resurrection, no redemption. But he lived by the revelation of his Father's will. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." That was enough to carry him through the rejection of men. And here is where it cuts into our own lives. We cannot live free until we decide whose voice matters most. Because if we live for man's applause, we will die by man's rejection. But if we live for God's revelation, we will stand even when the world collapses. When God shows you something about your calling, about your future, about a person, about a situation, you cannot measure it against human opinion. People may not understand it. They may resist it. They may call it foolish. But if it is truly from God, it will stand. His revelation is not meant to pass the test of popularity. It is meant to fulfill His purpose. And I know some of you are listening and struggling with this right now. Maybe God has revealed something to you in prayer, but the voices around you are telling you to ignore it. Maybe He has called you to step out in faith, but the opinions of people you love are making you hesitate. Maybe you are wrestling with what God has shown you about a person, and you are torn between believing His whisper and bowing to the crowd. Let me speak life into you. Trust what God has shown you. His light will not mislead you. His truth will not betray you. His revelation is the only ground that will not sink beneath your feet. Yes, man's opinion can be loud. Yes, it can hurt. Yes, it can shake you for a moment. But in the end, it fades. People forget. Crowds move on. Voices change. But God's revelation, when He opens your eyes, when He unveils truth, will remain as steady as the sunrise. It will not move because He does not move. So I choose today to release the chains of people's opinions. I choose to let go of the fear of their rejection. I choose to place my hope, my confidence, my direction in the one who speaks with authority. And I invite you to do the same. Because the moment you do, you will discover a freedom deeper than anything this world can give you. You will breathe easier, walk straighter, live bolder, because you are no longer swayed by the shifting winds of man's approval. You are anchored in the revelation of Almighty God, and when you stand there, rooted in His truth, unmoved by their opinion, you will finally know what it means to live free. There is something deep within us that longs for justice, that longs for truth, that longs to see things set right. And yet, when God reveals something to us about another person, about their flaws, about their weaknesses, about their mistakes, our natural instinct is often to respond with judgment. We want to expose. We want to condemn. We want to prove that we are the ones who saw it first, the ones who were right all along. But the Spirit of God does not move us toward condemnation. He moves us toward compassion. I wrestled with this myself. When God first showed me something about Charlie Kirk, I thought, Lord, what am I supposed to do with this? Do I shout it from the rooftops? Do I call out his mistakes? Do I let people know he is just as flawed as the rest of us? And the Lord quieted me with a truth I could not escape. When I show you someone's weakness, it is not to give you a weapon, it is to give you a burden. That pierced me, because it is so easy to confuse revelation with permission to criticize. It is so easy to think that God shows us the cracks in someone's life so that we can broadcast them. But what if God shows us the cracks so that we can pray for them? What if the whole point of revelation is not exposure, but intercession? What if the shock of what we see is meant to break our hearts, not harden them? Compassion is not the easy road. It is much easier to condemn. Condemnation makes us feel superior. It says, at least I'm not like them. At least I didn't make that mistake. At least I see clearly while they stumble. But compassion calls us to enter into another person's struggle. Compassion sees their weakness and says, there, but for the grace of God go I. Compassion weeps instead of mocks. Compassion prays instead of gossips. Compassion loves instead of labeling. I think of Jesus kneeling in the dust when the crowd dragged a woman caught in the act of adultery before him. They wanted condemnation. They wanted blood. They quoted the law. They shouted their opinions. They held their stones ready to strike. And Jesus, who had every right to condemn, chose compassion. He looked at her with eyes that saw everything she had done, and yet he said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. That moment echoes through time because it reveals the heart of God. Condemnation sees a person at their lowest and writes them off forever. Compassion sees a person at their lowest and envisions what they could be if grace lifted them up. Condemnation destroys. Compassion restores. When God showed me what He showed me, I had to battle with my own emotions. Part of me wanted to shout it out. Part of me wanted to say, look, he's not perfect. Look at what God revealed. But then I heard the Spirit whisper, If I revealed your flaws to the world, how would you want them to respond? With stones or with grace? And I had to bow my head in humility because I know the answer. If God laid bare my weaknesses before the watching eyes of others, I would cry out for compassion. I would long for someone to see me not as a failure, but as a human in desperate need of grace. And that is exactly how God calls us to see others. When He reveals something to us, it is not an invitation to climb higher on our pedestal. It is an invitation to bend lower on our knees, to carry that person in prayer, to intercede for their strength, to lift them before the throne of grace. Compassion does not deny the truth. It does not say, "Oh, their mistakes don't matter." Compassion sees clearly, but chooses mercy over mockery. It acknowledges the reality of sin, but it remembers that mercy triumphs over judgment. When I think of Charlie Kirk, I see a man who is bold, yes, but also human. A man who speaks with conviction, but who also bears weaknesses unseen by the crowds. And what God showed me was not meant to tear him down in my eyes, but to remind me to pray for him, to lift him up, to carry him in love rather than cast him in condemnation. And isn't that what we all need? We are not as strong as we pretend to be. Behind every platform, behind every voice, behind every reputation, there is a soul at war, a heart that bleeds, a spirit that trembles in the night. If we only knew the battles people fight in secret, we would weep far more than we would criticize. My friend, compassion is what keeps our hearts soft in a world that is so quick to harden. Compassion is what reflects the heart of Christ in a culture that delights in tearing others down. Compassion is what keeps us from becoming the very Pharisees who thought their righteousness gave them the right to stone others. When God shows you something about someone else, pause before you speak. Ask yourself, is this revelation meant to make me proud or to make me pray? And if you cannot answer with love, then wait, because God's truth is never given to us so that we can boast. It is given so that we can bear one another's burdens. The tears you shed in prayer may do more for that person than 1,000 sharp words ever could. The whispered plea for God's mercy may heal more than public condemnation ever will. Compassion is not weakness, it is strength restrained. It is love that chooses to cover instead of expose, to heal instead of harm. So when I say that what God showed me about Charlie Kirk shocked me, I don't mean it gave me ammunition. I mean it gave me empathy. I mean it forced me to see him not as a figure on a stage, but as a soul who needs the same mercy I need, the same grace I cling to. And in that realization, my heart changed. The bitterness began to fade. The desire to condemn dissolved. In its place came a burden to pray, a desire to intercede, a call to love. And I realized that this is what it means to truly walk in the Spirit. Not to stand in judgment, but to kneel in compassion. Not to throw stones, but to open arms. Not to condemn, but to carry. Because one day, each of us will be the one in the dust, waiting for a verdict. And when that day comes, we will not beg for man's opinion. We will cry out for God's mercy. And if He has given that mercy to us, how can we withhold it from anyone else? There are moments in life when the truth does not come softly. It does not whisper gently into our ears. It comes like a thunderclap, shaking the very ground beneath our feet. It arrives with a force that leaves us trembling, with a shock that makes us question everything we thought we knew. And when God reveals something in that way, it can feel almost unbearable. We are not prepared. We are not ready. We think we want the truth until it comes in a way that strips away every illusion, every comfort, every shield we've built around ourselves. That is what it means to embrace the shock of truth. Because truth, when it is from God, is not meant to flatter us. It is not meant to coddle us. It is meant to awaken us. And awakenings are never gentle. They shake us out of sleep. They jolt us from our slumber. They confront us with reality we may not want to see. When God showed me something about Charlie Kirk, I felt that shock. It wasn't the kind of revelation you can digest in one moment. It unsettled me. It made me look at things differently, not just about him, but about myself, about how quick I am to assume, about how shallowly I sometimes see. And in that moment, I had two choices. I could run from the shock and hide in denial, or I could embrace it and let God do the deep work He wanted to do in me. That is the crossroads we all face when truth comes like a lightning strike. Will we turn away because it hurts too much? Or will we let it cut us open so that healing can begin? The shock of truth is uncomfortable because it reveals what we would rather keep hidden. It exposes not just the flaws of others, but our own blind spots, our own biases, our own fragility. It is easier to live in ignorance, to cover our ears, to stay asleep. But ignorance may feel safe, yet it leaves us powerless. Truth may shake us, but it sets us free. Think of Isaiah, standing in the temple when the glory of the Lord filled the room. In that moment of revelation, he didn't feel proud, he didn't feel strong. He cried out, "Woe is me, for I am undone, for I am a man of unclean lips." The shock of God's holiness revealed Isaiah's own brokenness. And yet, that shocking moment was the very beginning of his calling. He was not destroyed by the truth, he was transformed by it. Think of Saul on the road to Damascus. He was so sure of himself, so convinced of his mission, so blinded by his own zeal. And then a light from heaven knocked him to the ground. The shock of truth literally blinded him so that his spiritual eyes could finally be opened. It was not gentle, it was not comfortable, it was not easy, but it was the turning point that changed him into Paul, the apostle of grace. The shock of truth does that. It disrupts so that God can redirect. It wounds so that God can heal. It blinds so that God can open new vision. But here is the part that pierces me the most. Many of us resist the shock of truth because it threatens the image we've built. We would rather hold on to our comfort than face reality. We would rather hear soothing lies than confront painful truth. We would rather live in shadows than step into light. And when God pulls back the curtain, our first reaction is often fear, anger, or denial. I felt that myself. When God revealed what He revealed, I wanted to question it, to push it away, to pretend I didn't see. Because if I accepted it, then it meant I had to change how I thought, how I prayed, how I lived. And change is never easy. But God does not show us the shocking truth to destroy us. He shows us to deliver us. He shocks us awake so that we will not die in our sleep. Sometimes what shocks us most is not the brokenness of others, but the brokenness in ourselves. Sometimes God reveals that the person we thought was strong is struggling. Sometimes He shows us that the leader we admired is human. Sometimes He reveals that the ground we were standing on was not as stable as we believed, and that can feel like betrayal. But in reality, it is grace, because it is better to be shocked by the truth than destroyed by a lie. The question is, will you embrace that shock? Will you let it drive you deeper into God's presence? Or will you resist it, deny it, and harden your heart? I am learning that embracing the shock of truth means bowing lower, not standing taller. It means saying, "Lord, even when I don't understand, I trust you. Even when the truth unsettles me, I believe you are good. Even when what you show me hurts, I believe it is for my healing." It is not easy to live this way, but if we do, we will find ourselves growing in ways we never imagined, because once the shock wears off, the revelation begins to reshape us. What once unsettled us begins to anchor us. What once frightened us begins to free us. I cannot tell you how many times I have prayed, God, show me the truth, only to be stunned when He actually did. And yet, every single time, that shock became the doorway to growth. Every single time, that unsettling revelation became the foundation for a deeper faith. My friend, do not run from the shock of truth. Do not despise it. Do not fear it. It is the hand of God shaking you awake, because He loves you too much to let you stay asleep. It may sting, it may unsettle, it may shake you to your core, but it will never leave you where it found you. It will carry you closer to the heart of the one who is truth Himself. And so I say again, what God showed me about Charlie Kirk shocked me, not because it was scandalous, but because it was real, because it stripped away the illusions I had built, because it reminded me that God sees deeper than any of us do, and because it called me not to condemnation, not to fear, but to trust. The shock of truth is not the end. It is the beginning. And if you embrace it, you will find that what once shook you will soon shape you. There comes a moment in every calling when you realize that the weight of what God is asking you to carry is far bigger than yourself. It is bigger than your reputation, bigger than your comfort, bigger than your opinions about people or situations. And in that moment, you have to decide whether you will cling to your own small perspective or whether you will surrender to the larger mission God has placed in front of you. That is what it means to remember the bigger mission. When God revealed something to me about Charlie Kirk, my first reaction was to narrow my focus. I wanted to analyze the details, to wrestle with what it meant for him, what it meant for his voice, what it meant for his influence. But the more I prayed, the more I realized that God wasn't showing me this just to make me think differently about one man. He was pulling back the curtain to remind me that this is not about personalities or platforms. This is about His kingdom, His plan, His purposes in the earth. It is so easy for us to get distracted by individuals. We either elevate them too high, as though they are flawless, or we tear them down too quickly, as though they are worthless. But the truth is, the mission of God has never rested on the shoulders of one man or one woman. It has always been about the movement of His Spirit through history, through His people, through broken vessels who carry His message to a world in desperate need. The bigger mission is not about Charlie Kirk. It's not about me. It's not about you. The bigger mission is that God's truth would be proclaimed, that hearts would be awakened, that lives would be transformed, that nations would be shaken by the power of His word. And when we forget that, we get lost in pettiness. We waste our time arguing over personalities instead of advancing the cause of Christ. We start caring more about being right than being righteous, more about being heard than being holy. I felt that temptation myself. I thought, Lord, what do I do with this revelation? Do I center it around Him? Do I focus the whole message on His flaws or strengths? And God stopped me. He said, this is not about Him. This is about me. This is about my church. This is about waking up my people. Keep your eyes on the mission, not the man. That humbled me, because it reminded me how quickly my vision can shrink, how easily I can lose sight of the eternal by focusing on the immediate. It reminded me that the enemy would love nothing more than to distract me with human debates so that I forget the heavenly call. The bigger mission is not popularity, not politics, not personal agendas. The bigger mission is souls, eternal souls, people who are dying without hope, people who are lost in darkness, people who are desperate for a Savior. And if I spend my time fighting over names and platforms, I will miss the very heart of why God put me here, to lift up the name that is above every name, Jesus Christ. When I remember the bigger mission, the way I see people changes. I stop seeing them as rivals or heroes, and I start seeing them as fellow laborers, fellow strugglers, fellow human beings in need of grace, the mission strips away my pride. It breaks down my obsession with image. It reminds me that what matters is not whether I am applauded or criticized, but whether I am faithful to what God has asked me to do. Think of Paul. He said, "Some preach Christ out of envy, others out of goodwill." But what does it matter? The important thing is that Christ is preached. That is a man who understood the bigger mission. He didn't get stuck in the weeds of who got the credit. He didn't waste his energy fighting over recognition. He rejoiced because the mission was advancing, and that was enough for him. That is what I want my heart to look like. I want to care less about who gets the spotlight and more about whether the light of Christ is shining. I want to care less about how people view me and more about how people encounter Him. I want to care less about man's applause and more about heaven's approval. And yet, if I'm honest, my flesh resists that. My flesh wants to be noticed. My flesh wants to be vindicated. My flesh wants to be the one who is right, the one who is honored, the one who is remembered. But when I remember the bigger mission, that selfishness has to die, because there is no room for ego in the kingdom of God. There is only room for obedience. What God showed me about Charlie Kirk, in many ways, was less about him and more about me. It was about testing whether I would get trapped in personalities or whether I would rise above them to focus on purpose. It was about asking whether I would get caught up in small battles or whether I would fix my eyes on the eternal war that is raging for the souls of men. And isn't that the battle we all face? Every single day we are tempted to shrink our vision. We are tempted to make life about our job, our reputation, our frustrations, our struggles with other people. But God keeps calling us higher. He keeps whispering, remember the mission. Remember why you are here. Remember that this life is a vapor, but eternity is forever. Do not waste your days on things that will fade. Invest your life in what will last. The bigger mission is what gives meaning to our pain. It is what gives purpose to our struggles. It is what keeps us standing when we feel like falling. Because when you know you are part of something greater than yourself, you can endure the storms. You can face the criticism. You can walk through the fire because you know it is not about you, it is about Him. And so, I find myself praying differently now. Not, Lord, make me successful, but Lord, make me faithful. Not, Lord, make me noticed, but Lord, make me useful. Not, Lord, let my name be great, but Lord, let your mission go forth. Because in the end, the bigger mission is all that matters. One day, every platform will crumble. Every opinion will fade. Every name will be forgotten except one. And when I stand before God, He will not ask me if I was popular, if I was praised, if I was applauded. He will ask me if I was faithful to the mission. That is what keeps me going. That is what lifts my eyes when I feel weighed down by criticism or doubt. That is what steadies me when I am tempted to quit. The mission is bigger than me. The mission is bigger than you. The mission is eternal. And if I keep my eyes on that, nothing, no revelation, no shock, no criticism, no distraction, can pull me away from the call of God on my life. So yes, God may show us things that surprise us, even shock us, about people we thought we knew. But let us not get stuck there. Let us lift our eyes to the greater picture, to the higher calling, to the bigger mission. Because at the end of the day, this was never about one man, one platform, or one voice. It has always been, and it will always be, about the kingdom of God advancing, about Christ being glorified, about souls being saved. That is the mission. And that is what makes everything else worth it. There comes a point in life when you realize that negative feelings are not going anywhere. They will visit you when you least expect them, like an uninvited guest that refuses to leave. They creep in when you are tired, when you are misunderstood, when you are betrayed, when the weight of your calling feels too heavy for your shoulders. And the mistake so many of us make is trying to fight them off in our own strength. We try to silence them, to bury them, to pretend they are not there. But God never asked us to deny our emotions. He asked us to bring them to Him and allow Him to transform them. That is the miracle of grace. He doesn't just take away our burdens, He turns them into fuel. When I was wrestling with what God showed me about Charlie Kirk, I felt a wave of negative emotions. Confusion, disappointment, even a touch of frustration. I didn't know what to do with them. Part of me wanted to push them aside, to act like I was unaffected. But the Spirit of God whispered, "Do not waste this pain. Do not waste these feelings. Let me use them." That stopped me, because for most of my life, I saw negative emotions as a sign of weakness. I thought if I was discouraged, I was failing in faith. If I was angry, I was falling short of holiness. If I was afraid, I was letting God down. But God began to show me that feelings themselves are not sin. What we do with them determines whether they become poison or power. When David felt fear, he turned it into worship. When Elijah felt despair, he turned it into prayer. When Paul felt frustration, he turned it into perseverance. And when Jesus himself faced anguish in the garden, he turned it into surrender. Not my will, but yours be done. That is what it means to turn negative feelings into fuel. You don't deny them. You don't wallow in them. You hand them over to God and watch Him transform them into something that propels you forward. Think about a fire. On its own, fire destroys. It consumes everything in its path. But when harnessed properly, fire becomes the very thing that gives life. It warms, it cooks, it purifies, it fuels. The same is true with your emotions. Unchecked, they can burn you down. But surrendered to God, they can become the very energy that carries you into your calling. I remember sitting alone after God revealed this truth to me. I felt a heaviness pressing on my chest. The temptation was to sink into discouragement, to let my thoughts spiral into doubt and frustration. But then I prayed a simple prayer: Lord, don't let this pain go to waste. Turn it into purpose. And slowly, I felt strength rise where weakness had been. I felt clarity form where confusion had clouded me. I felt hope push back against despair. My negative feelings didn't vanish, but they were transformed. They became fuel. You see, the enemy wants to use your emotions to paralyze you. He wants your disappointment to keep you from trying again. He wants your anger to blind you from seeing God's goodness. He wants your fear to silence your voice. But God says, "Bring it all to me, and I will turn it into fuel for your faith." I think of Joseph, betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, wrongfully imprisoned. He could have lived his life bitter, angry, resentful. But he allowed God to turn that pain into purpose, and one day he stood before the very men who wronged him and declared, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good." That is what it looks like when negative feelings become fuel. I think of Paul, shipwrecked, beaten, mocked, thrown in prison. At any point he could have quit, saying, "This is too much." But he chose to turn his pain into perseverance, his wounds into witness, his chains into a pulpit. That is why he could sing hymns at midnight in a jail cell. Because his emotions didn't master him, his God did. And I think of Jesus hanging on the cross, betrayed, abandoned, beaten beyond recognition. He could have called down angels to destroy his enemies. He could have lashed out in anger. He could have let bitterness harden his heart. But instead, he turned his suffering into salvation. He took the full weight of agony and transformed it into the greatest victory the world has ever known. That is what God is calling us to. Not to live in denial of our emotions, but to let Him redeem them. To let Him take the ashes of our pain and turn them into beauty. To let Him take the heaviness of our spirit and turn it into praise. To let Him take what was meant to break us and make it the very thing that builds us stronger. And let me tell you, it changes the way you live, because suddenly every setback becomes a setup. Every disappointment becomes an opportunity. Every pain becomes a platform. You start to see that the very feelings that once threatened to drown you are now the waves that carry you closer to God. It doesn't mean the journey is easy. It doesn't mean the emotions vanish overnight. But it means that with every tear, every sigh, every groan, you have the chance to lean into God and say, "Use this, Lord. Don't let it be wasted. Let it fuel me." And He will. He will take your fear and turn it into courage. He will take your sorrow and turn it into compassion. He will take your anger and turn it into passion for justice. He will take your doubt and turn it into deeper faith. He will take your brokenness and turn it into testimony. That is why I no longer despise my negative feelings. I don't see them as enemies anymore. I see them as raw materials in the hands of a master craftsman. Because every time I place them on the altar, God breathes on them and transforms them into something I never could have imagined. So yes, I was shocked by what God showed me. Yes, I felt the weight of emotions I didn't know how to process. But in the end, those feelings didn't destroy me. They propelled me. They became the fire in my bones, the fuel in my spirit, the reminder that as long as I keep surrendering everything to Him, even the worst of emotions can become the best of testimonies. And I wonder, what if you did the same? What if instead of running from your pain, you placed it before God? What if instead of letting anger control you, you let God channel it into passion? What if instead of burying your disappointment, you let Him build something out of it? You might just discover what I did, that the very feelings you thought would break you are the ones God will use to make you. That the very battles you thought would silence you are the ones that will amplify your voice. That the very storms you thought would sink you are the ones that will push you into your destiny. Because with God, nothing is wasted. Not one tear, not one sigh, not one moment of sorrow. He takes it all, and He turns it into fuel for the mission He has called you to. That is the hope I carry with me now. Not that life will be free of negative emotions, but that every one of them can be redeemed. Not that I will never feel weak, but that my weakness can become the very stage where God shows His strength. Not that I will never feel broken, but that my brokenness can become the canvas for His masterpiece. So the next time those feelings rise, the anger, the doubt, the fear, the frustration, don't run from them. Don't bury them. Don't let them rule you. Hand them over to the one who can redeem them. And watch as He turns them into fuel that will not only carry you through, but set the world around you ablaze with His glory.